Toy, toy.
Hi,
Hi, what are you doing?
waiting for you.
Do you want to do a bonus episode with me?
Of course I do. Yes?
Okay, cool. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Who are you?
I'm a writer, I'm a storyteller.
In telling stories about gay
The
characters.
world was filled with people
are
who
you?
occupy different intersections of otherness.
And I was fortunate enough to get in front of creative teams that were woke enough to see my light, to have conversations with others.
Who is this biracial angel, trans women and trans men?
I celebrate myself. Celebrate yourself and love each other.
Hi, Toy Toy.
Hi, JBC.
How are you?
Doing good today.
Yeah? What's special
Yeah.
about today?
Well, it's funny how everything happens when it's supposed to, as we always say. But I would say probably the last couple of weeks have been the hardest during this whole pandemic lockdown. But this week's been good, and then relatively good, but it's been getting increasingly better day by day. And today I had a conversation this morning actually with somebody in Canada on an IG Live. It was for this show she does called Together We Rise. And it was just not that I didn't think it wasn't going to be good, but it was just way better than I thought it was going to be. And she was really professional and really nice to talk to. And we just had a really kind of uplifting conversation. So it was a nice way to start the day, having an uplifting conversation that people were listening to and getting something out of. So that was nice. And then I did the global meditation May Day that was happening on YouTube. And then that was really cool. And now this, and I feel like it's all lined up today to be, I don't know, just good.
Today's a good day. Yeah, I'm really glad that I did that global meditation. Thank you so much for sending me the link to that. Yeah, I mean, I only caught the end of it. I saw the last few minutes of Tony Robbins talking, and then I did the actual global guided meditation with Michael Bernard Beckwith of the Agape Center here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, there's been a few of these, they're calling them ascension timeline meditations, these global meditations. There was one I think there's been one every month since this started. Marianne Williamson was heavily promoting one last month, but I think it's cool. I think obviously in times like these, that community gets together and everyone believes and knows in the power of collective consciousness, and how I think collectively this community is obviously looking at it as a positive shift and a cleansing and an ascension of some kind. So it's cool to just plug into that.
Mhm.
I also believe that about what's going on. Not to say that it's been easy by any means, but I guess what I liked about Tony Robbins and what he said is that he was using this word certainty, that it's the idea that hoping for something or wishful thinking isn't enough. You have to have certainty, or I usually just say a deep knowing. And Oprah says that, I think. But you have to have this trust and this surrender. And that with that comes this certainty that everything's working out, even though you can't tell, even though it may not appear that way immediately. So that's basically what Tony Robbins was getting at. And then I liked how he sort of set us up for the meditation, saying use this opportunity for meditation as a way to, he didn't even use the word manifest, but he used the word create what you want for yourself coming out of this, what happens next, and who do you want to be, in the fallout of this, because you have a choice. You have a choice during it, and you have a choice that you make during, which sets you up for the future, right? And I think that was the theme of Tony Robbins' little spiel. And then the meditation that Michael Beckwith said was that he asked, who do you want to become, right? And I just really liked that about the meditation. It had a real intention and purpose.
I liked that too. I think that's the part that I enjoyed the most. And so much of Tony's message and Michael Bernard Beckwith's message is so in alignment with how you and I try to operate our lives. I mean, because when it comes down to the deep knowing is the road to manifestation, because with so many things in our lives that we have manifested, it's not just a wishing or a wanting or a keeping your fingers crossed and having this desire in the back of your mind without truly moving towards it. It's a deep knowing that this is who I am, this is who I want to be, this is what I will create in my life. You may not always know how to get there. More often than not, we don't know how to get there, but it's having the end goal in mind, that intention. I always talk about how life is kind of like a GPS in your car. If you get in your car and you don't put in the destination, your car is not going to know where to take you. You have to have the end goal in mind, and you may not know what the journey will be getting there, and you may take some twists and turns along the path of getting there that you may seem confused or lost at times, but you just have to trust that end goal is what you're ultimately working towards.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and this podcast was a huge manifestation for me, and you were such a big part of it. I don't think people really know, but you, first off, inspired me to do this podcast, and you edited the entire first season. So much of it I couldn't have done without your support or without your guidance. Something that I admire so much about influential public figures who do what you do is that you're using yourself for a purpose greater than yourself, and you're being celebrated for really tapping into the deepest, authentic version of yourself and putting that out into the world. And I think that's really worthy of celebration. It's what I've always been drawn to. I think it's why I've always been drawn to like great writers and people who write their own memoirs and autobiographies, because they give this really deep, unapologetic, unpolished look into their lives, and we get a glimpse into who they are, where they started, the journey that they took to become the people that are in front of us today. And it's often messy. It's often very scary at times throughout their journey, but in being courageous enough to vulnerably expose that side of yourself to the world, it's given me inspiration and hope, looking at you and looking at others who have come before you, who have operated their lives in a similar manner, that I can do the same.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. And I was just sort of remembering our last time we talked for season 1 in my old house in Toronto, and like what a different time that was in my life. And it was really amazing to edit the first season of your podcast too, because here I was seeing, you step into that and you taking the bull by the horn, so to speak, and doing this passion project and putting yourself out there in a new way. And that was all part of like what you were manifesting for your career in the bigger picture, right? Like when you went to go speak at the keynote you did, you stepping into doing the podcast, and it just sort of started to shape this merging of who you truly are with your purpose in the world, right? Like you could start to see it blossoming at that moment when we did season 1, and now it's obviously come full circle, and you're doing that so much more, and like your involvement with Drag Race. And I mean, obviously we always have these really cool journeys to reflect back on. It's nice to have those perspectives.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I think that's something that I can look to you, something I just referenced. Like I can look to you, and I can look to Maya Angelou and other people who have just been so generous in sharing of themselves and their journey along the way. It's something that I have to take a lot of lessons from, and I really admire, because I didn't know how to do that. I did the first season of the show, and then I went through a really rough patch personally in my life. A lot of stuff came up. I was dealing with a lot of anxiety and depression. I was ending a very toxic relationship that I was in for about 3.5 years. I was dealing with a very challenging personality, a castmate on a show that I was filming for almost 5 years, filming in rainy Vancouver, which just brings on depression. I was meeting my biological mother at the same time. It was like all so much at once, and I didn't know how to process it myself. And I feel like I'm so open on this show, and I share so much of myself on the show, and I didn't know how to do that responsibly. So I stopped. I walked away from it, and I didn't get back in the swing of things and start recording new episodes until recent months, until all of this COVID stuff went down, and you inspired me and encouraged me to get started with it again.
Yeah, and I guess it's because, like, obviously you can never force someone to do something, including like the closest people in your life. But I definitely always, I guess, believed in you, or I always have believed in you. And like, I knew you were capable of creating the second season, I guess, on your own. And I think I subtly was always encouraging you to do that. Like, just do it, Jeffrey. Like, you just got to kind of like step into the production role, and you just got to edit. But that's only because, of course, I'm pulling from my own experience in producing television, and then obviously creating my own platforms and whatnot. But I know how valuable it is to sort of take take on all these roles and multitask and create and build something yourself from the ground up, and how satisfying that is and how rewarding that is and how much learning there is. So I guess how we project, I like wanted that for you, but it's because I knew you would get so much out of it, and that you were really just being resistant to your own abilities, right? Like this idea of getting in your own way. And so I obviously could see that. You can always see it for other people more than you can yourself. So I always anyways, all this to say, I'm glad we are here where we are and you're doing it. And that I think even this pause in the world, this sort of forced time to reflect, being this pandemic and this lockdown, is what pushed you through the door to create this. And that's one of the many benefits of what's going on for you, individually, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think that throughout this experience, I feel like my consciousness is expanding, and I'm challenging myself to do things that I didn't know I was capable of doing, that I would have never given myself credit for being capable of doing prior to all of this, because I've been forced into a position where I have to. I don't have access to a producer and a studio and sound engineers and an editor, an entire team of sponsors and all of that right now. Everybody's working remotely, and it seemed like there was no better time than now to do it. So much of what I was resistant to in the thought of coming back to the show was never being in a position before where I think as actors, we can so easily, and personalities, we can so easily kind of like pass the buck onto other people. It's our agents who get this job. It's our managers who do the deal. It's our lawyers who negotiate our rates. It's our publicists who have to play the bad guy and say yes and no to things. And it can get to a point where you get so accustomed to delegating roles to other people that you I was starting to give my own power away and not recognizing where or how I could tap back into that power. That mixed with being in a relationship where there was a lot of emotional manipulation, and I felt like my power was gone. I had given all of my power to the other person. I mean, I can recognize it now that I'm out of it, that I was the one who gave that power away. And it was over the course of several years of like grooming and conditioning me to hand my power over. But at the end of the day, I'm the one that's responsible for it. It really left me in a state of arrested development. Like I just wasn't moving. I wasn't moving in any direction. I didn't know what to do next or how to do it. And especially ending that relationship, I felt so lost for such a period of time, and I just had to go through such a deep healing period of introspection, therapy, journaling, meditation, just doing anything and everything I could to heal my mental and emotional state, that I couldn't even fathom coming back and trying to produce my own work. How do you do it? Because you've been doing this for so long now. I mean, you came out of working for a huge television network, working as a VJ, interviewing A-list celebs, Lady Gaga, Justin Bieber, I mean, all of endless A-list celebrities, to then producing your own work, creating your own content, starting your own empire and brand with Hot for Food. You went through a breakup as well, and yet you didn't stop. You just kept going. How do you think you did that?
Well, definitely what I've learned through this lockdown as well, is that when my life is out of control, my coping mechanism is work. So that might look like a great benefit or like sort of happy accident to some, right? Like, wow, what a great way to deal with something and shovel yourself into work and create. And of course I look productive and I can tick off all the boxes and have this thing everyone's kind of talking about, this, how we're all kind of, I don't like the word showing off, but in a way it's like, look at me and look at how productive I am. I'm good at that and I default to that. So of course there's great positives to that, because I'm able to make good content. I get really creative and I produce and I create, and it all goes out and it benefits other people. And I still do it with very much pure intention. But the negative side to my coping mechanism being workaholism is that I do compartmentalize and I stuff down the other stuff. And it takes me, I think, a very long time to A, realize I'm doing that, and then B, slowly chip away at the stuff I pushed aside. And again, I do things when I want to do things. You can't force me to do anything. Again, that's just my process, perhaps, is that I have to have maybe a period of denial or compartmentalization or whatever you might call it. I don't even know what to call it yet. But I've realized this during this time, because this is how I've coped with COVID, is I just went into overdrive, create, produce, extend myself, extend myself, extend myself. And then a couple of weeks ago, I was like, oh my God, like I cracked. Because I was like, how quickly I ran myself into the burnout phase and then didn't deal with the like emotional impact of what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
And while I still hold a very high vision and again, certainty that this is all for the better, both, individually and collectively, you still have to feel and you still have to acknowledge and sit with the other stuff that's going on. So I think I'm just seeing myself, I'm observing myself and seeing how I'm really good at implementing the distraction, but I justify it because it's my purpose and it's my work and it's creation. And I don't even know how this all works together, and I don't know what the solution is. I'm just saying this is what I've realized in the last couple of weeks about how I handled everything. And I don't even think I'm like, it was the wrong way to handle it. I don't think that. It's just how I do it. And I think I've always done it that way. And so even going through like the breakup before 2017, which also was connected to my business and my creation, even more so because of that interconnectedness of that relationship to my work, forced me to go in overdrive to work as well. And I almost felt like I had no choice because I had a book coming out. So thank God, anyways, I'm like, thank God that was all happening, because perhaps you could see how maybe there's a disservice happening to myself where I'm ignoring certain things, but I also think it's serving me in some way. I mean, it must be, right? So I try to look at things from all angles, and I never really come to any definitive conclusion. But when I think back to that time, I do think, well, I'm really glad that I had that distraction of that cookbook, because while maybe it took me longer to like acknowledge my hurt and my sadness and my anger, which it certainly, I know it did because it's coming up now. It's like, at least I put something magic into the world that benefited other people, at the sacrifice of some emotions that I can deal with later.
Right.
I mean, kind of. I see that as a good thing, I think. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah. And I hear you. And I can relate to that. I think the lesson that I'm taking out of what you're saying and my own experience over these past 2 years, the little hiatus I took, year and a half, however long, is that you have to deal with these emotions eventually. And I think that keeping the perpetual forward motion would have allowed me to remain in a creative space while still authentically expressing what's going on with me personally, while still working through these emotions. I think that I just completely compartmentalized. I think I completely put all of my work stuff over to the side and had to focus on just my emotional well-being, which, once again, I don't think it was the wrong thing to do, because when you know better, you do better. And I did take that very concentrated amount of time to focus on my healing, and it was very beneficial to me, because it's been a year and a half since I ended that relationship, and I've healed from it in many ways. There's still stuff that comes up, and I'm finding that now that I'm back in this position, recording new episodes of the show, I'm finding that a lot is coming up that I hadn't really expressed, because I haven't really talked about it a lot. I've talked a lot about it in therapy. I've talked a lot about it with you. I've talked a lot about it with my boyfriend now. But yeah, it's that strange thing that I'm finding, and I think so much of it comes from being an actor and being in this industry and being trained to be so polished and taking publicity training and speaking in sound bites and editing yourself and never really pulling back the curtain of the truth of who you are that much for the world to see. And I'm realizing that doesn't work for me. I have to, in order for me to experience what I consider true success, and for me to operate in a world in a way that I feel like whole and truly like my whole self, I have to be as open and honest and vulnerable and authentic as possible.
I like this conversation we're having, because I feel like this is what I'm reflecting on in general. And obviously we always are able to draw parallels to each other, but also we also deal with things differently too, and we can learn from that. But it's interesting because you diving all into healing and putting aside the creative momentum or whatever, or the career momentum, and I kind of do the opposite and then delay my healing, my emotional stuff. all of this is to say, I think, and what I want to cultivate more of course, I'm always like trying to be the best version of myself. And sometimes that in itself gets exhausting, this idea of having to strive to be better, right? Or fix something. What I'm starting to notice and what I've been saying a lot in the last few days to myself is just like, you need to just accept how things are also, and accept yourself. Like, accept that that's how you go through something, that there's nothing wrong with it. And same for you. Although it is opposite of me, it's how you went through something and it does serve you. And how can you just accept it rather than compare it to if you compare it to me and say, oh, but she's being so much more productive. And yet I'm like, yes, but I'm delaying my healing. And then I'm looking at you going, wow, he's healing and he's becoming more enlightened. And yet he's delaying his, you're not though, you're not delaying, but it's just, I'm saying that's how we perceive it, right? I just want to be so much more accepting of what I do and who I am, instead of always being like, oh, I should be doing this, or supposed to have it this way. Like, I do a lot of that. I'm so hard on myself. So what I would love to come out on the other side of, I think, this whole thing and in the reflection I'm doing is just like, how can I just bring some more acceptance and ease to who I am and how I do what I do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. Thinking about it now, I don't think that it would have been possible for me to be doing the things that I'm doing currently professionally had I not taken that time to heal after the breakup. And I'm saying that in regards to hosting and judging on Canada's Drag Race specifically, because I had taken that time to heal and then ended up back in a position by circumstance where I was back judging on RuPaul's Drag Race. And then from that, returning to RuPaul's podcast, What's the Tea? And that's where I had my first real, true, open, honest, public conversation about the breakup and about what I had been experiencing. And through that conversation and deepening that connection with Ru came a depth of our friendship and connection that hadn't existed before, which led to Canada's Drag Race. So, I mean, like I said, no regrets, but when you know better, you do better. And now I'm just learning how to operate in a way that is less jarring and to find more ease and joy and flow to it all. And this is something that you and I have been talking about over the past couple of months since quarantine began, but like learning how to navigate work and being a freelancer at this time, and then also balancing sustainability and relationship. How are you feeling about that right now?
I think that for me, and it's just a default software program where work is priority. Creation and whatever I'm creating or producing or putting out into the world is priority. Everything else comes after.
As a point of reference for everybody, I didn't do the normal intro for Toy Toy for Lauren Toyota for this episode because she appeared in the first season of the podcast, and we already did the whole "Who are you?" rundown. But she is the creator, visionary entrepreneur behind her vegan sensation, Hot for Food. So she has her own blog, hotforfoodblog.com. She has her YouTube channel and her Instagram page, and she's reached tremendous success in this world of veganism that she's created on her own as a freelancer.
Thanks. Yeah. So and so to me, it's just so important because this is like, it's like a mission, right? It's like my life mission statement, and it's so all encompassing. It isn't obviously just a job, and anybody who runs their own business or is a creative artist or an entrepreneur knows that like your work becomes all consuming. And I don't have any definitive like way of looking at this, because I'm like, but it's a good thing. Of course I have to take care of myself, and I always remember, and I still prioritize, because now I understand the interconnectedness of what I create and why my internal world does need to be looked after first, because it's how the stuff becomes manifest in the external world, right? Like, it's how creations are born, in alignment, allowing it to come through you in a way. I really actually believe that, and I've practiced that and seen that. So not only is my outer stuff that I create valuable to people, and that's important to me, and it's helping shift minds and help people on small levels and big levels, but it's only that way because it's come from a pure intentional place from the inside of me. It requires all of my time and energy. And I don't really know the balance of saying no to some of that, because to me, there's no separation the way there once was, like as a younger person, like looking at like relationship, self-care, job. They are all connected. And have I figured out the perfect synergy of it all being connected? No, because I think definitely I neglect intimate relationship over work. And I would say, if I were to just say, where's the area that causes you the most
stress
or trigger, like where you actually need the real healing, is intimate relationship, that part of the pie. If I could bring as much attention and focus to that the way I do myself and my career, well, then we'd have this perfect situation, wouldn't we? So I know that I need to do that, and I'm even becoming more aware during this time, these last 3 months, that that's more true than ever. And I think in the last week or two, I think I've snapped myself into attention a little bit to like start bringing more attentiveness to that and that idea. Because it's like, if I want to be in a conscious, loving relationship and have this intimacy that I want, that I always envisioned, it's like, then I have to hold those visions much more in focus than I do. My vision, I realize my vision board doesn't even have anything about that on it. It's all job stuff and like life stuff and personal self-love stuff. And I look at it and I'm kind of like, oh, wait, I'm talking about like self-love. And I get that has to come first, but you haven't even put any vision of companionship, partnership, journeying together on there. And so that was a kind of an epiphany of like, oh yeah. And I have a lot of resistance in that department.
Yeah.
And I'm aware of that. Anyway, so without trying to put too much pressure on myself, like I always do, and criticism, it's just like, for me, it's just like, that's coming a little bit more into focus in terms of like, you don't need to neglect one to do the other, that they can all kind of work together. But, I think I'm still figuring out the how of that. And again, like you said, you don't necessarily need to know how. Put it on the vision board, and then you'll take these like little incremental steps or conscious, thoughtful steps to create what you want.
Right. Yeah. I think it's got to be so relevant to so many people out there in the world listening right now, because we are all in this new experience together, and people working from home and being in this close proximity to your partner or spouse or lover or whatever they may be, and trying to find this balance between nurturing and nourishing your career and what needs to be done, and then also nurturing and nourishing this relationship and something that is like a living, breathing thing that needs love and needs attention. And I have been finding it to be quite a challenge because, one, I mean, first off, I spend a lot of time on my own, and it's how I recharge. Two, I'm used to my boyfriend, my partner, being out in the world working 8 to 10 hours a day. We weren't living together prior to this. We would spend 5 days a week together. We would have those 2 days alone to do our own thing. And in those 8 to 10 hours he's gone a day at work, like that's the time that I take to focus on myself, to fill myself up first, to work, to meditate and journal, to go work out, to respond to emails, to connect with friends, to do whatever it is that I need to do, knowing that I have until 6:30 p.m. and he's going to be at my house, and then I can give my full self to him. But I haven't had those boundaries or that division. And then that on top of now doing, I'm doing, I was going to say the majority of the work of this podcast on my own, but I'm doing this entire podcast on my own right now. I mean, I'm booking all of my guests. I'm recording everybody on my own. I'm dealing with sound engineering. I'm editing. I'm posting. I'm doing all the social media stuff. Like, it is a lot. And it was such a learning curve for me over the first month or so, especially all of the editing stuff. And thank God you were there for me. You were such a support and so patient with me and helping guide me through so much of it. But Eric, my partner, wasn't used to it. He wasn't used to me not being able to give all of myself to him at all times. So I'm learning to find balance with it. Our communication skills have had to just get that much stronger. I found we just have to be so clear about that, when I'm working, when I'm not working, communicating when we need each other. Do you, at a certain point in the day at like 5:30 p.m. when you're done work? Is that when we take time to go lay down in bed together and connect and cuddle and catch up on the day? Are we going to have dinner together every single night and then watch something together and have this time? Are we going to meditate together? We weren't doing those things. For the first month and a half or so into this quarantine, it's not that we took each other for granted. It was such new territory for us. We were just trying to survive and find our footing, that we weren't consciously taking the time to be with ourselves, to be with each other, and then to nourish ourselves and the relationship in a way that was necessary in order for it to survive. It's challenging for me going through this, but you're in this intimate relationship, and right now during quarantine, like, you're here in LA, I'm in LA, but your boyfriend's stuck up in Canada. So you're trying to like maintain this relationship and this intimacy and like dealing with these personal challenges of you learning to navigate this path. And you're not even physically together right now. It's got to be so tough. Where's the reward? Like, the reward for me at the end of the day with this is like that connection and that physical intimacy, and like there's the immediacy, the tangible reward of putting time into nourishing this relationship. Like, where is that reward for you?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, like, sometimes I annoy myself so much because I'll just always say, like, I'm such a big believer in just like what's happening is like meaningful, right? Like, everything means something. Don't fight what's happening and wish it was a different way. Deal with what is. Like, I'm so logical and pragmatic in one way, and sometimes can be very like out there in other ways. But I guess my perspective all along up until recently was just like, it's okay, we're apart. It's meant to be this way. What's the lesson? What do I need to see out of this? Okay, fine. He needs his own time to work out a lot of his own personal development and career, whatever. And I also need time now to give energy to the audience, the people that are expecting something from me or whatever. And I want to create, and I'm creative. So I looked at it, I tried to see it all from all positive sides at the beginning, but I don't know. That's what I'm saying. I'm so good at like stuffing down what I need. It's like, I am very physical. Like, when it comes to like an intimate relationship, like the physicality of it to me is the relationship. And without that, I'm like, there's basically no relationship. Because am I sensitive and emotional enough to have an emotional relationship this way? Not really. Like, I need that like physicality of it. So yeah, I think it has just been very challenging. There's been a lot of tension and a lot of confusion in terms of just like wanting to push it aside in a way, like not push kind of push the relationship aside and just like let it work itself out. But hearing you just speak, also I know that like, just like anything else, a relationship requires work. And I'm just I think I've changed it in the last few days because like I said, changed my focus, but I just wasn't bringing any attention to it. So what do I expect is going to happen? Right?
It's going to die. I mean, like, you grow, it's like so many relationships come to an end because you grow apart. And in this situation specifically, where we may be physically apart from our loved ones because we actually cannot be together, if we don't infuse the relationship with that emotional attention, you grow apart.
Yeah. And so I think, again, like that idea of like snapping myself out of my sleep towards some things, again, in this period of self-reflection, I think I was just like, you're creating this mess. Like, you're creating this confusion and this like lack of clarity here in your relationship. Like, take responsibility here that you haven't been bringing enough like attentive listening, and that you haven't been bringing enough compassion to your partner, and you haven't. So yeah, I just sort of realized all this, and I'd like to do better now that I know better. And I've certainly been in a little bit of like this flight mode, right? Of like, well, this is too hard. It's not meant to be. So I better leave.
Yeah.
Like, that's again, just default programming and fear. And I don't want to live from a fearful place. When I see other people doing it, I do feel compassion. And so I don't want to do that to myself. Like, I want to, yeah, but I don't know what it all means. Like, I don't know when I'm going to see him. And I think I'm just trying to be present to it. And I think my only goal is to just listen better and be there more.
Yeah.
But
I mean, the fact that you and I are going through this only means that we as a collective consciousness are all experiencing this as well. There's got to be millions, billions of couples out there in the world who are experiencing this. Something else that I came up against over the past couple of weeks, and I feel like we're just starting to be able to navigate it in a way that's healthier. Is, and I know that you went through this as well, and it caused a lot of contention between you and your partner, being on the same page when it comes to safety regulations for COVID-19. Right? Like it seems like it wouldn't be that big of an issue, but unless both of you were on the same page, oh my God, the levels of stress that it has brought up has been unbelievable. I feel like we're just figuring it out, how to find ease in that, and it just comes down to constant mindful communication.
Mindful communication, and we were talking about our control personalities, right? When you feel like everything's out of control, you just grasp at whatever you think you can control. And I think in my case, sometimes I think that's my partner.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Which is that's not true. That's just something I'm telling myself. So I think, especially in my case, being that we're not even in the same house, so it doesn't really matter. This idea of trust came up. You don't trust me, blah, blah, blah. And I think that I can now see that. I think when I was passionately angry and trying to control and really was just scared in general and worrying, I wasn't seeing clearly. I couldn't listen, obviously, even if it's like, you don't trust me, it's like I just wouldn't listen to that. But now with some perspective, I can definitely see why that is received that way. And I think I've just let it go a little bit. But yeah, I can imagine a lot of couples are bickering and fighting about those things and procedures. And I do feel like, well, I don't know, again, not to make it like hetero, but I do think female personalities tend to be a little more controlling of those minor details like that, right?
Yeah.
You have a heavy female essence anyway, so.
Yeah.
And one always falls on the other side or the other. And I think, so I think women tend to, we're just so attentive to every detail and the hundreds of millions of things happening all at once, that we're like, but you touch that, and then there's germs on that, and I got to clean that, and I got to do, like, that's how women think.
Uh-huh.
So that's why we nag, because we are thinking of 10 things at once and trying to control everything in our environment to make us feel safe. And I think when we're talking about germs, which you can't even see, and this sort of virus that we don't trust, well, of course we don't trust a virus. But you can really start spiraling with these thoughts. And so I've had to really just figure out a way to calm that down and kind of let it go a little bit. Because again, you can't control it.
Yeah. So yeah, I think you are so right. For me, it really came down to my control or my emotional reactions to things when I really took some time to get clear on what was at the root of it. Why was I actually feeling this way or reacting this way? It was because I wasn't feeling safe. It came down to just feeling safe for me. Every time I was having an emotional reaction, it wasn't that I didn't trust him. It's just that when there was less communication, I wasn't sure what he knew and what he didn't know. I didn't know if we were operating in the same ways. Okay, so when we go to a grocery store, when you go to a grocery store by yourself, are you wearing gloves? Are you using hand sanitizer? Are you washing your hands as soon as you get in the door? Are you wearing a mask? Are you staying 6 feet away from people? Like, if you don't know those things, then I feel like it makes it much more complicated. So getting clear on that, every time I questioned him, it wasn't that I didn't trust him. It's just that if there was no communication, I didn't know. And when I didn't know, the unknown led to fear and feeling unsafe. And there's so much that we can't control right now, but there are also some things that we do have a modicum of control over that are going to make all the difference in all of us getting through this much quicker. Because if we do try to be on the same page with things, and we all take personal responsibility in how we are navigating through our ways through the world during all of this, it's the transition back to some sense of normality is going to be that much quicker and that much smoother. So that was a big one. That was a big one. Just really truly talking and saying, so for you, for example, I came over to your house to give you something, some starter for bread. And when I got back, I let him know. So I was at Toy Toy's house. We stayed 6 to 10 feet apart the entire time. We wore a mask the entire time. We didn't touch each other. We didn't hug. I went inside her house to pee at one point, but she wasn't in the house. I washed my hands immediately, like just getting super, super clear so that when I come home, he doesn't have to be fearful. Like, oh, Jeffrey just went over to Lauren's house. Like, is he potentially contaminated? Did he, like just the unknown is what leads to worry, I think.
Well, what's interesting about that is that one person may need to know the answers to all those questions to feel safe, and another, it may not even enter their brain to, do you know what I mean? There's just a bit more of a, is that trust? I guess I was been trying to decipher. Is that trust or is it not? I don't know the answer.
Well, I don't know the answer either, but I feel, I'm really trying to let my guard down and my walls down from the lessons I learned from my last relationship. But a lesson that I did learn that I really implement, not just in my relationship now with Eric, but in all of my dynamics and all of my relationships in life, is that I don't just give trust to anyone anymore. In a way, you have to earn my trust, because when I just blindly or willingly give you trust without really knowing you or knowing if you're worthy of it, I guess it's just trust. I've learned that trust has to be earned, and it's not something that I'm constantly putting people to a test, but trust has to be earned, because when I've learned in my own personal experience, when I blindly give trust to people, it's often led to me being taken advantage of.
I want to know what Brene Brown says. I got to go back to her whole talk about trust to really understand what it means.
Well, she talks about trust being trust, like Brene Brown says, trust is built in very small moments. It's those little, seemingly meaningless exchanges on a daily basis where I either confide in you about something that's important to me, and I'm just going to trust that you're not going to pass that information along to somebody else, or I'm in a vulnerable position and I feel like I need to lean on you, or I need you to help support me in that moment. And when you cast me aside or don't take time to nourish or nurture our friendship or relationship, it makes me lose trust in that. It's those tiny things, those choices we make every day that either build or dismantle trust.
That's true. This Charles Feltman, trust is defined as choosing to risk making something that you value vulnerable to another person's actions. Making something that you value vulnerable to someone else's actions. It's quite complicated, but you're right. It manifests in just these like little small exchanges, and how, because it is about whatever you value. And if someone doesn't value it equally, it creates a lack of trust. Which actually, it's funny we're talking about this, because this is very much what's going on, and we don't need to go too far down this rabbit hole, but this idea of trusting the government right now and trusting the people in power. And there's this whole thing about trust happening right now, and it's dividing the world. It's dividing the country here in America. And it's dividing even people I know in terms of what side are you on here. And this idea of wearing a mask is a political statement at this point about who you trust. And it's getting out of control, but it's interesting that we're talking about it, because it really is the crux of these decisions being made right now by people on their day-to-day lives.
Well, it's also, so much of it comes down to consistent communication as well, because so much of the information that we've been receiving has been so varied from week to week or day to day. So it's like, it is hard to decipher what we can trust and what rings true and what is actually going to be helpful and what isn't.
Yeah, but you know what I think we have to be careful of, and I think I'm probably guilty of doing this in these conflicting moments that I've had with my partner regarding these safety measures and whatever, is what we have to be careful of is taking the fear and the information and the confusingness of what we're consuming every day in the media and on the news, or just in our general fears of our mind, and then like bringing it into the relationship and making an enemy of the person we're living with or the person we're partnered with, like almost like seeing them as the enemy because the rest of us feel so threatened by what's going on in the world. So then we take this intimate person in our lives and we just project and vomit onto them that fear.
Yeah, I hear you. That absolutely rings true for me. I think that was
And I'm guilty of doing that. And I didn't realize I was doing it. And I was so justified and steadfast in my position and how I felt and claiming safety that, and I'm not accusing you of doing this, but I think I see it myself, but really I was just taking the the scariness of whatever's going on out there and how uncontrollable I feel from it. And then just like blaming, almost like unconsciously blaming it on or taking it out on, which we all do.
I'm finding this is what has been helpful for us is just it's through communication. We're finding, what is your stance on this? What are you afraid of? What are you not so concerned about? What measures are you taking? How do you see this, our dynamic continuing on if this is going to be something that we're dealing with for the next 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months, trying to paint a clear picture together so that we can move towards something together, because it felt like we were almost in 2 different narratives for a while, and it's learning to build that trust through communication. I can think back to the beginning of our friendship. I mean, we've been friends since 2005, and at the beginning of our friendship, as much as at the beginning of us knowing each other, as much as we wanted to be friends, neither of us really knew if we could trust each other because of the people that were around us in our world. It was a very superficial entertainment industry world. So it took at least 1.5 years, 2 years of us knowing each other and then coming back together at some point, that moment where we ran into each other on the street in Vancouver. And through that communication of me opening up and being vulnerable, and then you opening up and being vulnerable and saying, oh my God, you felt the same way about this situation that I did? Oh, I felt that way too. Oh, you were afraid of this? Oh, me too. Oh, you want to connect over this? Me too. Like we built trust through communication.
And then it's like, now we can trust each other because we're kind of like on that same page. Like you were using that adage, being on the same page, and it's true. I think that's a good question to ask if people are listening and they're going through the same thing we're talking about regarding COVID and whatever. It does come down to communication. That way you can but asking, what are you afraid of?
Yeah.
Like tell me in detail what it is you're afraid of, and not for me to judge it, but if I understand what you're afraid of, that understanding will paint a clearer picture, right? Instead of making assumptions. And there's probably some surprising answers from people in your life about what they're afraid of. Probably things you wouldn't have even have thought of. So having an understanding around that.
Definitely. It's very interesting how through that communication and discussing what we're afraid of, I came to a very base inner child need of fear of abandonment, needing to not be abandoned. And by the fear of you being unsafe, you not taking proper safety precautions when you go out into the world in the way that it is right now, and you potentially putting yourself at risk and getting sick, and you potentially dying or having to go into quarantine and hospital and me not seeing you. It's that inner child in me that's afraid of losing you, of being abandoned.
Yeah, I wouldn't have even thought about that, but that's so spot on, and probably my thing too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Me too. So I mean, I think we're definitely discovering this through all of this, right? Because it's been over 2 months now that we've been in quarantine, and challenging as all of this is, I feel, and we always have to preface this with we're definitely in a place of privilege where we're relatively safe. We have a home, we have food in our cupboards, we're okay right now, when so many billions of people on the planet aren't actually okay right now because they don't feel safe because they actually aren't safe. But I think when you put things in perspective based on each individual situation, this really is an opportunity for us to evolve and expand as a species. And it can come down to something as simple as us learning how to re-tap into our own humanity by operating in ways that we have long abandoned, communication being one of them. Like the fact that we are to have these deep, intimate relationships with our partners, but we haven't taken the time consciously in the past to ask, what are you afraid of? What am I doing that is potentially triggering you or making you feel unsafe? What do you need right now? Like that is us tapping back into our humanity, and that is us tapping into the collective consciousness and developing this empathy muscle and really flexing it, and that compassion in a way that I know that I certainly haven't done for many years.
Yeah, entirely. I think you're right. And I think, This pandemic is showing us how everything is connected. We're all connected in this, whether from privilege or poverty or whatever, we're still all intrinsically connected and consciously connected. And so if you are in a more privileged position, I think it's also a responsibility to do this work, because you have to understand it's still connected to the bigger web of consciousness. And so instead of sitting around, drinking alcohol all day, drowning your sorrows, if that wasn't something you had an issue with before, but it's becoming one, it's like, no, if you're in a position where you actually have space to reflect, or you have, whatever, all these privileges that we have and that we took for granted prior to this, I think then it is your responsibility to, where in your life can you bring more focused attention to these things, to improve, to connect. And those they have ripple effects. I know it's like in some people hold a position where it's like, that's not true. Like what does one thing I do matter? But like, we're literally seeing it with like the spread of this disease. So it's like, we are all connected, whether it's via this microscopic virus or, tendrils of energetic light, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Vibrations. We're all made of the same stuff.
Definitely. It's certainly given me an opportunity to explore my own humanity in ways that I hadn't given myself credit for, that I was even capable of doing. And it's like such like seemingly stupid little things, like cooking for myself again, realizing what is going into my food, baking bread, gardening and growing my own vegetables, brewing my own kombucha at home, growing mushrooms, going through my garden and foraging and taking items to make smudge sticks. Like little things like that I never did those things on my own. I go to the store and I buy bread. I go to the store and I buy kombucha. I go to the flea market and I buy smudge sticks. It's been a very interesting exploration of all the things about myself that I didn't even know existed.
Mm-hmm. And that I think is really cool, because you're connecting to this, again, you're connecting to something invisible that is within nature and the food we eat and the bacteria in the sourdough and the kombucha and these like cultures and these like living things. And so that's important. And also it reminds me though of like, because I've been likening this period to, similarly in my particular journey, to when I lost my job twice before in different times of my life, 2008 and 2014. But 2008, I had this sort of same period. Obviously, it wasn't this global thing. Well, there was the global economy crashing at that time, and it was anyway. So that happened. But what I meant to say is that in that period of reflection, just like this, is when I became vegan and started connecting to food like you are, and making those more conscious decisions about what's going into my body and how does it make me feel. And I feel like that's very similar to you, just seeing like, oh, I can make these things and I can like connect myself to nature in this way with my food. And there's just something very, I don't know, beautiful about that. And same with me, beautiful about listening to the food that you're eating and how it makes you feel, because everything has that information in it.
So much of me not attempting to do these things for myself was me protecting myself and protecting my ego, because I was afraid that if I failed at them, that I wasn't good enough, like I would beat myself up. So I feel like I built these walls around my most authentic self, and didn't allow myself to be vulnerable in these ways, and trying and failing. But in doing so, I was also cutting myself off from my own intuition, because when you cut yourself off from your most authentic self, you're also cutting yourself off from that voice that guides you and leads you, those stage directions from the universe telling you what move to make next to do the right thing. And it's been very interesting tapping back into my own intuition in this way.
Yeah, and your ultimate expansion, right? Your ultimate growth and expansion.
Absolutely. How are you feeling about the current state of the world? It's kind of like the veils have been lifted around veganism and around like the meat packing industry and factory farming, and the way that animals are treated, and the way that people like where their food and meat actually comes from. I would have never been able to guess at the beginning of this that people would be looking at veganism in a whole new way.
I mean, this just gives me shivers, because there's such a bigger, I like that you said the veil's been lifted. Yeah, the doors are blown wide open on these slaughterhouses now, in a way that the community I'm part of has been sort of calling for and manifesting for so long. But if you think about the events leading up to this, and you think about Greta Thunberg and the climate activists and the global call to action that has been put out into the consciousness, and then this is the result. Again, you never know how things will manifest. You could never fathom this as a solution to things, but it is. And it's showing us that. And I don't think we're near the answer yet, but we're working toward it. And it's very quickly building some kind of momentum. And look how quickly the earth regenerates itself. You're seeing these stories. And again, haven't checked all my sources. Again, I'm just looking at social and different articles, but hearing things like certain animals are coming back to certain areas that were once obviously very industrial and had no wildlife, and flamingos flying over somewhere in India in this area they never were, and the ozone layer closing the hole that everyone's been talking about since God knows when. That's incredible. It's only been 3 months, guys. Yeah, it's just so cool to look at that and see that as a result of what's going on. Obviously, some of this will linger, and obviously some of this will make monumental shifts and changes, whether it's in technology or how we manufacture certain things or whatever. I don't know where it's going, but I do enjoy the conversation being focused to our consumption of animals. And I'm not one of those vegans that's going around saying, if everyone was vegan, we wouldn't be in this position. That's not what I believe. And, I haven't read enough of the science, but they say, scientists have said, well, zoonotic, diseases would exist even if we were all vegan. And they get into certain scenarios as to why that is, just based on other ways we cultivate our food, including plant foods. So look, I don't know. I don't have all the answers, and I haven't done all the research, but I certainly I'm not making that generic statement. However, I don't think the way we consume animals and manufacture them is sustainable, and it's showing us that. Do I think it's feasible that everybody can go vegan? Not necessarily, but we can drastically reduce our consumption, especially in the first world, especially in North America, and it will make a drastic difference. And I guess, yeah, the spotlight's just being shone so that we can figure out what the solutions are. What is heartbreaking about some of the stories I'm seeing, but it's interesting, is some of the plants having to shut down, like a pork plant and an egg farming place, and then thousands of these animals are no longer good for consumption.
Are they euthanized then?
Well, I saw one great story where a bunch of animal sanctuaries took in over 1,000 hens, egg-laying hens, and distributed them to different sanctuaries, because obviously one sanctuary couldn't take all of them. The community is doing what they can. It's, I don't think, possible to save all of them, obviously, just as we try to save them all every day, but millions and billions get killed for food. But it's heartbreaking. I don't know what happened with the pigs at the pork plant, but yeah, we got to clean up some stuff. We should never be put in that scenario again, though, where if a plant needs to, like these plants closing and all these animals wasted and killed for no reason, like we got to rethink the plan. I have no idea. I wish I could be smarter. I always say that. I wish I was smarter to come up with what these solutions are, but I can only do what I can do from where I'm at, which is give people a solution anyways. If you can't get the meat or you don't want to eat the meat, now what do you do? And that's where I come in. That's my role.
Yeah, it is your role, and you are operating in this way in a very thoughtful, conscious way, even within the vegan community, because it is your mission at this point with your new Hot for Food cookbook is about reducing waste. Essentially, you're taking leftovers or food that is left in your fridge in your home and trying to repurpose it so that it doesn't go to waste.
Yeah, at least get it. I don't think I give all of the solutions or answers to how to do that, but I'm definitely promoting the idea of not throwing away leftovers and figuring out ways of transforming your food so that it's still interesting to eat throughout the week. Because leftovers really, I think some people like leftovers, but for me in particular, I'm not passionate about leftovers unless I take them and make something totally different out of them. And so that's something I share on my channel and what I've tried to infuse into the new cookbook, at least. And like I said, I don't spell out all the ways. It's not like a no waste cookbook by any means. It's not really part of the branding of it, but definitely I try to encourage people to think about, again, cooking technique and how to transform their food in ways they may not have thought of, so that they can keep things interesting and keep things tasty and use up what they have, and don't let stuff get pushed to the back of the fridge and forget about it, pulling things out and figuring out how you can make a new meal out of that stuff. So
it all comes down to just a constant conscious evolution, my darling. We are all a work in progress, right?
100%. Yes.
So let's try to give the people some more light as we start to wrap up this conversation. What are some of your spiritual practices that you've been implementing through all of this to help keep yourself lifted and balanced and on a higher vibrational frequency?
Well, I have been pretty regularly meditating. Nothing really changed, you know. I always meditate, sometimes to different guided meditations or sometimes doing silent meditations. It's given me a little more time to pay attention to the moon cycle and really hone in on what's cosmically happening and how it relates to what's manifesting on Earth for us. So I like that. I just like taking time reading about that and learning about that because it's all been very much aligned. If you have any interest in that stuff, if you look at what's going on with the planets in retrograde and all that stuff, we talked about this like personally on our own phone call. But yeah, it's all very much about the death of an old life and the rebirth of a new one and all of this self-reflection. It's calling us to do this. I mean, it's definitely like mimicked. It's completely what is meant to be happening. And, you know, we'll find out why on the other side when we have more perspective. So anyways, meditation is obviously very important, and exercise. Because I work so much, I sometimes don't exercise. And I prioritize work over going to a class. I mean, I was going to yoga classes before this started, so I've just had to start doing them from home and figuring out more fun ways to keep myself interested in exercise in my backyard. Because even once the mask mandate was on about like wearing a mask all the time, I even stopped going out walking. I was just like, oh. So I'm doing workouts in my backyard, and I definitely have better energy, better sleep, like when I've exercised. I haven't done it every day, but a few times a week. Nothing much more complicated than that. I think just a recent thing I started doing in the last few days, because I listened to a podcast with a woman named Donna, and she's an energy medicine woman, and she just obviously talks about energy and different little things you can do that combine a combination of Reiki and traditional Chinese medicine and these types of things to just move stagnant energy through your body. So I've just been doing these, like, some of it's a bit of the EFT, like emotional freedom or tapping, and some of it's stretching, but like moving energy. And I don't know, I've noticed a difference doing it. And it's one of these things that you kind of, you know me, I'm like a bit of a skeptic, even though I believe in like all this unseen stuff. There's still this like thing of like, you seem silly doing this, but it's like, well, there's no harm in doing it. And if it works, great. So I'm just going to do it. And I notice even like immediately sometimes doing these energy things I'm doing are making me feel better. So they're nothing big or elaborate. They're just very small things. But that's just what keeps me aligned throughout the day, I guess.
When was the last time you cried?
Oh God, coming out of that meditation today. I didn't cry during the meditation, but I felt the energy and it was very powerful, and I felt very overwhelmed with emotion. And I think I had just started to kind of well up, but then Michael Beckwith was really speaking quite powerfully, and it knocked me out of wanting to cry. But then I opened up my phone after on Instagram, like a few, 5 minutes after it ended or something. And I looked at this picture of this gorilla. It was in a hammock, and I started crying. I was just like, I love apes, and I especially love gorillas. And
me too.
They just bring me to tears. And it's so human. And it's just having this moment. And I was like, wow. It makes me cry looking at it now. Just like contemplating. And he just looks like a person, but he's a gorilla.
Have you ever read the book Ishmael?
Oh God, I need to read that. In fact, I need to read that very soon. It's been on my list for so long.
You should read it right now. It's about a sentient, like clairvoyant gorilla, this like psychic, powerful being is all knowing and deeply wise. And it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful read.
I know it's about that, and that's why I want to read it. And it's funny you just mentioned that, and I saw the gorilla, and I don't know if I even told you this, but like last year, I was like, I had this like epiphany where I was like, I need to go to this gorilla conservation organization and figure out how I can volunteer. And like, I just like had this like immense magnetic pull to like drop everything, go to Rwanda, or Uganda. There was 2 options, and figure out how I could like do something to help conservation of gorillas. And I look at this as like, again, it's not a failure, but anyway, I built it all up to be this thing, and I thought, again, I had it in my mind as to like how it would all happen, and it didn't happen that way. And I was like, okay, it's not the time. And then now I can see why it's not the time. But I want so badly for at some point in my life to do something like that, and I don't know in what capacity. And I actually spoke to a particular organization on Skype, and they were so generous, and they obviously just need help. They're non-for-profit, they need help. But when they started speaking about how to get involved and who's allowed to volunteer, and you have to have quite a scholarly scientific background, and I thought, but there's got to be something I can do. Like I know this is not true, but I always say this, I'm not smart because I'm not book smart. I didn't go to university, I don't have a degree. Yeah, I know it doesn't matter, but I couldn't come up with a solution when we spoke. And after all I was crying about it for so long, because I was like, I want to help, but like I don't know how, and I don't know how I can do it, but obviously there's a way, I just don't know what it is yet. And so it's a big manifestation, it's a big thing, and I just am not ready yet. And I looked at it as almost like a failure when I started going down the road and couldn't figure it out. Because obviously that's not true, but at the time it was quite interesting thing I was exploring. But I really want to do something, and I don't know what it can be. And they left it as like, well, you think about how you think you can, like, here are the different things. And I was like, I don't know what it is, and I don't even know if I'm willing to give up the time right now to do it even. I started thinking that way. I was like, am I being selfish? I was judging myself so hard. Because there's something so virtuous and like ridiculous about being that person, you know, having that story that's like, I dropped everything. I dropped my life and blah, blah, blah. And like went and did this like thing, this like virtuous thing. I know that's not my story, but you know, do you know what I'm saying? It was just a loaded discovery.
I know exactly what you're saying. And if anything, you're making me want to do whatever is necessary for me to do so that I can join you on this journey to Wanda and help save some gorillas too. I actually really, really want to watch Jane Goodall's masterclass. Have you seen ads for her masterclass?
I know, I haven't.
Are you familiar with Jane Goodall? Like the woman who was like a preservationist of chimpanzees?
Chimpanzees. And then I love Diane Fossey's, obviously, her own Gorillas in the Mist. I always cry when I watch that.
Yeah, so beautiful.
Like, look, I don't want to be Diane Fossey, but it's like, it seems like a bit of an imaginary dream, but...
Well, aren't gorillas vegan?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's something there.
I know. Here's the thing. What I know for sure, as Oprah would say, is there's something here, but I don't know what it is yet. And I, again, just have to trust that it will reveal itself when it's supposed to. And I think I was forcing and rushing it a little bit and looking for an escape from my entrepreneurial life. Like, sometimes I get very like, this isn't my purpose, it's this. I don't really have that, but all of a sudden this gorilla thing seemed like something I should do. Because I've always for me now, it's like, I'm doing this vegan thing, and it's obviously like very much for the animals, but there was like something in me being like, I need to do something more for the animals. And like, what is that? And there's a million ways to do it. And I didn't know why gorillas was showing up as the answer. And my other thing was that I didn't want to just, you know, take a bunch of money and go on a touristy trip to see gorillas. Of course I want to see gorillas. But it was about trying to figure out a way to give back at the same time and not just be like a tourist who pays to go see gorillas in the mist, which you can do. You can go on a hike, right? And you can pay, and you can stay in this amazing safari lodge. And like, obviously I would love to do that, but there was this like almost this guilt of like, if you're going to do that, what else are you going to do?
Right. I'm hoping that maybe because of the explosion of the popularity of Tiger King and everybody having this look into the world of big cat rescues in a way that they may not have been able to see before, and then also being able to connect factory farming and animal production being as unsustainable and cruel and as fucked up as it is, putting those two things together somehow and realizing that there's really no difference between a gorilla and a tiger and a chicken and a cow, and they're all sentient beings and they all have souls and personalities and they're conscious beings just like us. And maybe, I don't know, I'm hoping that maybe that idea or that feeling spreads globally in a way it hasn't before, and maybe people will start putting more focus on trying to create safe spaces for these animals to be, and not just in small, remote areas like in Uganda, Rwanda, but like in this country, for example. Like, what can we do as individuals with what is directly in front of us? How can we help be used for a purpose greater than ourselves and to make the world a better place?
Well, that's exactly what I sort of thought about when the whole gorilla thing wasn't turning out the way I wanted. And I questioned myself, well, maybe it's just because you want the selfish experience of like seeing a gorilla in the wild, which is like, what's any different than that in a zoo? Even though they're in conservation land and the people that take care of these gorillas are studying them and they're trying to keep, the urban environment from encroaching on the forest. And anyway, I called myself into question for all that, for sure, because it's true. Well, what can I do in my immediate vicinity? Well, it's farm animal welfare. It's not necessarily going all the way to Africa, but but yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I definitely want to do something more involved with like the animal side of things. I just don't know. I don't know what calls to me. I mean, animal rescue is such a difficult and very expensive endeavor. And anyone that I've met who owns farm sanctuaries, they do it for the animals and they're so passionate, but it's thankless work and it's very expensive to run these things. And you have to rely on so much fundraising from the rich. And a lot of the animal welfare people that donate, they're the invisible faces of the community. They have money and they do their part by giving money and resources to these organizations. And it's amazing that they do that because they wouldn't exist otherwise. But they're not necessarily public facing people that you would even know who they were, right?
Well, I'm hoping that maybe throughout all of this, we won't come out of it with, a brand new shiny veil of amnesia, completely forgetting what it is that we've experienced. Because in the veil being lifted on factory farming and animal production and the intense overbreeding of animals, and now being in this position where factories and plants are shutting down and there's this abundance of animals that are left that will not go to slaughter to eventually be food, and then therefore they're just deemed as useless. Hopefully there's a level of consciousness around that, around the level of breeding. Like, animal rescues and farm rescues may be incredibly expensive, but there doesn't need to be the abundance of these farm animals on the planet to begin with. That's all man-made. That's our doing, and we've pushed it to a place where it's beyond unsustainable. It's just radically dangerous.
Yeah, it's exploded. It's exploded onto itself, and I do hope that that's something that comes out of this with solutions. And yeah, it's quite overwhelming to think about.
Throughout all of this, what are you celebrating or loving most about yourself right now?
Oh, what a good question. I think something that I can celebrate about myself and love about myself is my resiliency, my ability to go with the flow. I think I have resiliency. I do. And I think I've proven that multiple times in various situations similar to this. And then this was the bigger one. And I'm doing it, and I'll do it again. I don't, I guess, collapse in the face of challenge. I rise up and I get excited. I eventually have a moment of breakdown, but it comes later, which I think is helpful. The initial is a surge of something very much wanting to survive and wanting to thrive with whatever's thrown at me.
You're not only one of the greatest examples I have of a strong and resilient human being in my life, but you inspire me in ways that you're aware of, but in ways that you'll never know, because I don't know if I'll ever be able to put some of the impact that you've had on my life into words. I love you so much. I'm so deeply grateful for our friendship, for our connection, for the way that you supported me from the day that we developed this bond together. You're my angel. You're there for me whenever I've needed you most, whenever I've needed that love or support. And I've not always been the first person to ask for help, to reach out and to open my heart and be vulnerable and to admit that I don't know what I'm doing, and that I'm scared, and that I feel unsafe, and that I need help. And you're the first person I will turn to and reveal that to. I'm just so deeply, deeply grateful for you. I'm so glad that you're here in Los Angeles, and even though we can't physically be together, knowing that, we're only a 15-20 minute drive away from each other, and if anything were to happen, that we're here and that we've got each other's backs. And I know that you know that I've got your back too, and that I love you and I support you. And in the words of Brita Wool, I just want to let you know that I love you, and I think you're doing a great job.
Brita! Thank you. You always say that to me, and I appreciate it. And I do love you very much. and you're the wordsmith in this relationship. So all I can say is me too. I think the same thing, and I think what's special is we have so much unspoken love too for each other.
I love you, Toy Toy.
I love you too.
Thanks. And if I can leave you all with one thing, it's this: celebrate yourself and love each other. I'm JVC, and I love you. Remember to subscribe, rate, and leave a comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or however you tune into our frequency. You can support us by sharing this episode with a friend and spreading the love with each other. You can find us at conversationswithothers.com and reach us at Conversations with Others on Instagram, at CWO Podcast on Twitter, and conversationswithotherspodcast at gmail.com. Our outro song is Looking for Another by Brittany Allen.